Hi everybody, it's Matthew here from Bead Spider. Today I'm going to be showing you part 2 in my rainbow jewellery series, this gorgeous peyote stitch bracelet. I'll be using even count peyote stitch. I'll show you how to add this little pattern section into the middle and also how to attach this gorgeous 3-strand magnetic clasp. As with the other 2 designs in this series, I'm going to be using the exact same 8 colours of my Yuki Delica beads. It's a fun, simple little design, so let's get started. There are 2 distinct parts that make up this bracelet, the rainbow peyote section and this little heart piece that goes in the center. Using the pattern that you can get from our website, you can see I have both of those parts just here. Obviously, this is the rainbow section, and here is that little heart section. But if you've never used a peyote pattern before, you might be wondering how exactly you read it. If you look down here at the very bottom, you'll see we've added in a pattern reader to cut out. Once you've cut it out, you'll see it looks a little something like this. For odd numbered rows, 1, 3, 5, etc., we use one end, and for the even numbered rows, we use the other side. To understand how a peyote pattern works, the beads of row 1 are represented in red, the beads of row 2 are represented in blue, the beads of row 3 are represented in green, and the beads of row 4 are represented by purple. In terms of our little pattern just here, if I lay that down with our pattern reader sitting on top, you'll see it fits in nicely so that you can read your pattern. So row 1, which is an odd number, we can align it like this here. And you'll see inside of these little gaps what beads you need to use. 1 red, 1 orange, 1 yellow, 1 green, a light blue, a dark blue, and our purple. When we come to our even row, you can pop it on this side like this, and it will show you, there you are, there's row 2. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, dark blue, and purple. The easiest way to complete our little bracelet is if we begin with a little bit of our rainbow section, then we make our heart, which will be the center, and then we can just make sure that we even out so that we have the same amount of rainbow section to one side and the same amount of rainbow section to the other side. The first thing to do is cut yourself a nice comfortable working thread. It doesn't really matter how much you use, just whatever's easy for you. Odds are you will need to change threads, so don't be too worried about it. It's easy to change, and I'll show you how to do that as well. Put a needle on one end, and then we're going to add on a little stopper bead. Just pick a contrast bead that's different from your rainbow colors. In this instance, I've got one of the little white beads here, and I'm going to slide it down my thread onto the bottom. Bring the stopper till it's about 20 centimeters or 8 inches from the end of your thread. Take your needle through it once more and pull it all the way tight to lock it into place. There we go, and that's nice and secure on the end. Coming back to this diagram here, I'll show you how we start working in peyote. What essentially we have to do is add both rows 1 and 2 at the same time, but in such a way that it makes adding row 3 nice and easy. The way that we do this is by picking up the beads of row 2 first, then the first bead of row 1, then the second bead of row 2, the second bead of row 1, the third bead of row 2, the third bead of row 1, and so on until we've added the entire length of our pattern. So we'll start row 1 and 2 together according to our rainbow pattern. So that's going to be 2 purple, 2 dark blue, 2 light blue, 2 green, 2 yellow, 2 orange, and 2 red. Once we've added that, we'll be in position to start reading row 3, but we'll see that when we get to it. I've added all those beads on, so I'll slide them all the way down to my stopper bead, ready to begin row 3. So now that I've added rows 1 and 2, I want to add row 3. Using our rainbow pattern here, we can see that because I want to make row 3, that's an odd number row. So I'm going to put my odd row start to the top here. That's going to show me that I'm going to need a red, followed by an orange, then a yellow, a green, a light blue, a dark blue, and finally a purple. So to begin the process, I've picked up my first red bead, and I'm going to loop around because I want to start row 3. As we saw in the pattern, row 3 starts beside row 1. So to do that, I will skip around and pass through the second bead, the final bead, which is of row 2. So passing into that bead from row 2 there. As I pull that nice and tight, you'll see it will sit neatly side by side compared to that previous red bead. Now I'll pick up an orange bead. I'm going to skip the very first bead where the thread is exiting from and go into the second of those 2 orange beads. Just into that one there. As I pull that all the way through nice and tight, you'll see that will sit nice and neatly beside that first orange bead. We're going to do the same thing with the yellow bead now. We'll skip the first bead and pass into the second bead along, down through this one just here. Again, we'll pull it all the way through, and once we've got it through, we'll just firm up our tension so that it sits nice and neatly beside. From this point here, we can just keep working in the exact same way all the way down the row. Finally, let's pick up the last bead here, which is one of our purple ones, and once again we'll skip the first bead and pass into the second bead there. Once you pull that last bead nice and tight, you'll see they're all sitting zigzagged side by side and sitting firmly on top of that little stopper bead at the very, very bottom. Now it's time to add row 4. So let's take a look at the pattern again. So now that we're using the even row, if we use the back of our even row start, you'll see we're now down here. This is where we start. We'll start with a purple, a dark blue, a light blue, a green, a yellow, an orange, and finish with a red. The ones that are protruding outwards, we're going to call those our up beads. And then the ones that are sort of in between those gaps, we're going to call our down beads. So as we add the 4th row of beads, we're going to fill the gaps, threading from one up bead to the next to the next. I want to have my first bead sit beside this one here, and it'll be in that purple color, so I'll thread into this one here. Picking up that first purple bead, I'll thread into that bottommost up bead. I'll hold it with my fingers to keep my tension firm, but it's easy to adjust that tension again once we've got it firm. Pull it tight and you'll see they're starting to sit beside the previous row again. We're going to pick up our next dark blue bead and pass through the next up bead. So we'll skip the down bead and pass up through that next little up bead. So we'll pull it tight and it will nicely fill that little gap in the center there. That brings us into position now to add our next bead. I'll hold my tension nice and firm down here between these 2 fingers. I'll pick up the next bead, which is a light blue, and I'm going to pass into the next up bead. I'll pick up a green, pass through the next up bead, pick up a yellow, pass through the next up bead, pull it tight. Now I have an orange. Again, through the up bead, pull it tight. I'll bring my red bead up here. And last time we'll pass through that very, very end bead. Again, on the same side, pull it tight, and that's going to complete our 4th little row of peyote. I'll do a couple more rows in this same rainbow pattern. If it's easy for you, you can always turn the piece over and start working upwards away from yourself. So I'll do that now just so that you can see how easy it is. The next row, again, it's going to be exactly the same. Red, orange, yellow, green, light blue, dark blue, purple. So let's begin. So now I've completed row 5, let's repeat the process again for row 6. I'll flip over my work and I'll continue. And you can see now that's added 6 beads. The way that you can count which row you're up to, if we see I started with this one here, this is row 1 at the very end. Row 2 ends here. So row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, row 5, and row 6. You can also count how many beads you've got at each end. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I know I've finished row 6. So now I can start adding in my heart section. We know that I'm up to an odd row. So using the odd row start, I want to start adding in my little heart. I've done a few rows of rainbow. So let's see what we need to add. That's the very first bead of our heart section. So you can see I need to add a red, then an orange, one of my white heart color beads, then a green, a light blue, a dark blue, and a purple. So I'm not going to add a yellow in this row. I'll add a white instead. So we'll begin. So now that I've got all of my beads in rows 1 through to 6 added, I can start working back downwards through that little heart section. I know the order that I can work with them, so I can either thread them downwards, or as I find a little bit easier, I'll turn my work over and get it in position to work upwards. So I know I've got a red bead first. I'll add my orange, the first of my white little heart beads, and now back to my rainbow pattern. So a green, a light blue, a dark blue, and a purple. Now let's take a look at the pattern again. So now it's time to add my next even row. So we'll turn the piece over. I've done this first one, so I'll cover that up. And we can see I start down here. So a purple, a dark blue, a light blue, a green, 2 white beads, and finally we'll finish with that little red bead. Start with a purple. Now a dark blue, a light blue, a green, the first white bead, the second white bead, and finally my red bead. So I've checked my pattern and I feel comfortable turning it over now, ready to do the next row. I'll continue working now until I've got that little heart pattern finished. If we take a look at the finished piece, you can see that this little heart is right in the center. I'm going to continue making my rainbow pattern on the one side for half my bracelet length, and then I'm going to continue the process back on the other side. But let me show you how to add in a new thread in case you run out or when it comes to starting that second side. Now, if we have a look, I've got my thread coming out of the middle of a row here. I'll show you what you need to do if you start running out of thread and you want to bring in a new thread. It's quite an easy process. We'll just weave our thread back into our work, go around a few beads to lock it in place and cut off the excess. Then we'll bring in a new thread back to this point and we can continue along. So from this point here, I can just jump across to the bead beside and go back down. Let's go across into the next one, pull that all the way through as well. I can just continue threading around, following the path of beads beside or above or below until I'm in a position where I feel like I'm quite comfortable. So now I'll go to the bead beside, then back into the bead that I was just coming out of. I'll do the same process once more, across to that bead there, and across to the one beside him, and up to the one above that too. And this is going to, by going around those same few beads a few times in a circle, that's going to make it really easy for me to just cut off my excess thread. You can also see that you can hardly see where I've done that process. So now I'll just plop this down and I'll bring myself in some scissors to cut it. Here we go. Cut that off. And now you can see that thread is finished with. So now that I want to add in a new thread, I can just pick that up. It doesn't really matter exactly where you come in. We just want to make sure that we're exiting from this bead just here, which was where we were finishing our previous thread. So I'll come in just maybe here somewhere. Doesn't matter too much where. Just thread in there and leave yourself a little bit of a tail. It doesn't matter how much, because we'll probably just cut this off in a second. Then I'll go into the bead beside, pull it all the way through, and I'll go back into that same bead where we started from, pull it nice and tight, and weave around until you get back to where we need to be. I can just bring in my scissors, cut off this little excess piece because I'm not going to use it. And there you go, ready to continue working. Once you've finished the first half of your bracelet, it's time to remove that stopper bead and start working with the second one. So I'll take that little stopper bead off by just unthreading it. If it does get a little bit stuck, you can always just use a pair of pliers and break the bead to get it to come off. But ideally, you want to just feed the thread back through the bead and try and undo it without breaking the bead. And now I've got that little piece free. I can start working with this if I want to. In fact, I will do that just to make sure I'm not right on the very end when I finish this thread off. You don't really want to finish it with the last bit of thread at the end. It's a little bit easier if you're somewhere slightly more in the center. So I'll attach my thread to this tail thread just here. And I'll start adding a few beads so that I can then finish this thread off as well. So now that I'm in the center, I can weave this thread off and bring in a new one to the same spot so I can continue working. So you can see I've got my bracelet piece all finished now. I've got my heart right in the center and then an even amount of beads on both sides. So it's perfectly symmetrical around that central point just there. Now all I need to do is attach my magnetic clasp. It just slides open like this. It's got a magnet at either end, one right here on the tip, and its matching counterpart on the inside of the cylinder. As it slides in, you'll hear a really positive click. There you go. That's going to mean you don't have to rely on the magnet to keep your clasp together. You've got that metal on metal strength there instead. All the magnet does is keep the two sides of the clasp from sliding apart. Using a little pair of pliers here, you can see this 3mm jump ring just needs to be opened up and it can be slid into the end little beads of my peyote. They've got lovely big holes, these Miyuki Delicas, so your little jump ring will thread in really nicely inside. Using my pliers just here, I'm going to just bring this in and lever the two sides open in that motion there. I'm not going to pull them apart from each other because that's going to make them a lot weaker at the base of the metal. By opening it in this way, it makes it much easier to return it back to that neutral position. So I'm going to bring that jump ring nice and close, and I'll just use the pliers and get it through that little gap just there. I'm not going to close it just yet. I want to attach the other jump rings before I do that. Add in that second jump ring. But we're not going to add that third little jump ring just yet. So let's thread the first little jump ring into the clasp and we'll close it up. So I'll just use my fingers here with that tool and bring the two ends aligned with one another. There you go. That's one of the two links attached. So now that I've attached one side, I can just thread that link into the other side, hold it down and against the side of my little bracelet, and then again using my pliers I can just close this jump ring over and I'll just bend this into place to secure that entirely. Now that I've got that fully attached, it's much easier to add that third jump ring. I'll fold this little clasp beside and I'll roll it to the back. Using my pliers, I'm going to thread this next jump ring into that little green bead. Now to attach the little clasp loop to the jump ring, I can just roll it over to the other side and you'll see the little loop just drops nicely inside there. Using my plier, I can just grab it and even use against the clasp to push against it. Once the jump ring is approximately closed, I can just loop it over to the other side and then do my fine adjustments to make sure that each little jump ring is closed more accurately. You can see there's a tiny little gap in the jump ring just here. I can just come on in with my pliers very delicately now that it's fully attached and fix that. To do those final adjustments, it's definitely better to use a second pair of pliers to get them super neat. There we go. 3 perfectly closed jump rings. Repeat the process on the other side and you're finished. There we are. Now you can see I've got that heart pattern right in the center, equal amounts of bracelet on both sides, and then at the back I have this gorgeous 3-strand clasp. Pop it open, pop it on your wrist, and you're ready to start wearing. I hope you've enjoyed this part of my rainbow jewelry tutorial series. If you haven't seen them already, make sure you pop on over and check out the other 2 videos as well. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel if you want to see more videos like this one. Thanks very much for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.